I ain't the devil no more. I'm just a father trying to make peace with his boy. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as Silas Crowley stepped from the shadows, not as the feared black devil of the plains, but as a father. But for Ethan, the son of an infamous outlaw, forgiveness is tangled in blood, bullets, and a past that refuses to stay buried. True Wild West Stories invites you to saddle up and ride with us through one of the most gripping tales ever told. The early autumn sun was still trapped behind a curtain of thin fog when Ethan Crowley swung open the old pine wardrobe in his father's bedroom. Dust floated in the air like tiny spirits. Something behind the stack of flannel shirts caught his eye. A wooden box, aged and cracked, with a rusted clasp. He hesitated, fingers hovering just above it, before finally lifting the lid. Inside lay a revolver, black steel, cold and heavy, its handle engraved with a faint skull, and next to it, a worn canvas pouch that gave a metallic rattle when shaken. He loosened the drawstrings. A handful of coins, gold by the look of them, though tarnished with time and age. A gust of wind rattled the windows. In that moment, a line echoed in Ethan's mind, a line spoken by his father long before the man took his final breath. "Whatever you do, boy, don't walk the path I did." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, the revolver resting in his palm like a weight from another world. His hands trembled, not from fear exactly, more from the uncertainty of what this meant. His father, Silas Crowley, had been a quiet man in his final years, a recluse. Some said, sick in the head. Others whispered louder words, outlaw, killer, ghost of the black vultures. He never believed them, not really. The scent of burnt hay and old leather lingered in the room, the same scent that clung to his father's jacket, which still hung behind the door, untouched since the day they buried him under the crooked pine by the fence line. "Ethan, you up yet?" a voice called out from the kitchen door. Martha Green, his nearest neighbor, stepped inside without waiting for a response, arms full of fresh eggs and a loaf of cornbread wrapped in cloth. "Brought you some breakfast. You eaten it all or still living on just black coffee and grief?" Ethan quickly shut the box and shoved it under the bed. "I'm up," he muttered, forcing a half smile. "Coffee's still hot." Martha gave him a long, squinting look. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He shrugged and poured her a cup. They sat at the wobbly table, the smell of cornbread warming the kitchen. "Town's buzzing again," Martha said between sips. "Some drifter came through the bar last night, asking questions about Silas. Damn fool bartender told him you still live here." Ethan stiffened. So, she said sharply. "Your daddy didn't leave behind a clean name, Ethan. Folks don't forget a man like Silas Crowley, no matter how deep he tried to bury his past. There's still talk, old rumors, missing gold, that damn skull-engraved gun." She looked him in the eye. "You find anything strange in this house lately?" He lied without flinching. "No." After Martha left, Ethan walked out to the back pasture, the revolver tucked in his coat. The fog had lifted, revealing the vast stretch of land his father had once worked with blistered hands and quiet resolve. The grass was brittle. The barn groaned in the wind. A hawk screeched overhead. He stopped near the old water trough and slowly loaded the revolver, one bullet at a time, the clicks sounding too loud in the morning hush. He held the weapon up, aimed at nothing, then lowered it again. Someone was watching him. He could feel it. From the corner of his eye, a figure stood beyond the fence at the edge of the road, not moving, just watching. A man in a long coat, face obscured by distance and the brim of a hat. Ethan blinked. The figure was gone. Heart thumping, he walked back toward the barn. Just as he rounded the corner, his boot sank into a soft patch of soil, damp and recently disturbed. He knelt down, brushing aside the loose earth, revealing the imprint of a boot. Not his. It was facing the barn. Someone had been here, and not long ago. He looked up, scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows and the whisper of wind through the dry leaves. Somewhere deep in his chest, something shifted, a sense that whatever door had been locked with his father's death had just cracked open, and whatever was on the other side was already walking in. By late afternoon, the narrow main street of Dusthaven simmered in the kind of golden haze that made even bad news feel like it belonged. A few horses were tied lazily to the post outside Maynard's general store. The tin sign above creaked with every dry gust of wind, and somewhere the clang of a blacksmith's hammer kept time with the day's rhythm. Ethan Crowley stepped off his old pickup and onto the dirt road with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't 2 steps toward the hardware store before the whispers started. "There he is. That's the Crowley boy, ain't it? Heard he's got his daddy's gun." He kept walking, head down, but the voices grew bolder. Jed Miller slouched on a bench outside Rusty Bell's saloon, spat a stream of tobacco and smirked. "Well, well, if it ain't the son of the goddamn Reaper." Beside him, his brother Hank laughed and slapped his knee. "Tell me, Ethan, that skull-engraved piece yours now, or are you just polishing it for your dead daddy's ghost?" Ethan paused, jaw clenched. His hands were tight around the strap of his bag. "Leave him alone," came a soft voice. Ruby Lane stood in the shadow of the saloon's doorway, wiping down a glass. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean. Jed chuckled undeterred. "Ain't saying nothing untrue. Folks saw it. Same revolver the Black Vultures used to carry. Ain't that right, Hank?" "Damn near legend," Hank agreed, leaning forward. "Reckon he's got the map, too." Gold's gotta be somewhere. Before Ethan could speak, Reverend Cole emerged from the post office. He was a tall man with silver hair and a face lined like an old creek bed, weathered by decades of sermons and sins. "That's enough," the Reverend said firmly. "This town don't need ghosts stirred up just 'cause folks got nothing better to do." He looked at Ethan with something between sympathy and warning. "You all right, son?" Ethan nodded stiffly. "Just need nails and fencing wire." Reverend Cole gave a nod, then turned to the rest. "Leave the dead where they belong, and let the living try to get by." Inside the store, the air was cooler, but no quieter. A group of old-timers near the Cracker Barrel were swapping tales with too much relish. "They say he's keeping it in a box under the bed," one whispered. "He's got his daddy's blood, that one. Quiet, just like Silas." "You wait and see." Ethan paid quickly and left, his skin crawling like he'd walked through spider webs. As he stepped back onto the street, a man he didn't recognize, dressed like a traveling freight runner, tipped his hat and stopped him. "Name's Doyle. Heard tell this place had a Crowley still livin'. That you?" Ethan nodded slowly. Doyle scratched at his beard. "Just curious. Used to run with folks who said your old man was a legend. Never believed it till now. Some say that gold was cursed. Others say it was earned." He grinned, then walked away without another word. By nightfall, the wind picked up. The sky had the color of bruised apples, and the air felt like it was waiting to break. Ethan was in the barn feeding the cattle when the smell hit him. Smoke. He turned to see the far end of the barn glowing orange. "Shit." He grabbed the nearest bucket, flung it into the trough, and began dousing the flames. The fire licked up the dry beams like a starving beast, but he managed to knock it back, coughing through the smoke until it finally hissed and died. The damage wasn't total, some singed hay, a blackened corner, but the message was clear. This wasn't an accident. Martha arrived not long after, breathless, with her shawl trailing behind her. "Lord have mercy, are you all right?" she asked, rushing toward him. He nodded, voice hoarse. Someone lit it. You sure? He held up a chunk of cloth he'd found near the flames, blackened at the edges, with a strange, stitched insignia barely visible beneath the soot. It looked like a wing, maybe a claw. I found this, he said quietly. Martha took it in her hands and went pale. That's from a vest, like the ones they used to wear. They're gone. She looked at him, eyes narrow. Not all of them. Later, after the sheriff stopped by only to offer a half-hearted, must have been a prank, and drive away, Martha helped Ethan settle the animals. The town might whisper, but Martha worked without a word, calming the cattle, hauling water, her hands worn but sure. When she left, she handed him a warm tin of beans and said, "Don't let 'em rattle you, Ethan. Not all of us think like them." He sat on the porch with the tin in his lap and watched the stars try to break through the smoke-stained sky. From somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. He looked again at the burned patch by the barn, the cloth in his hand. The past wasn't dead, it had just waited, and now it was reaching back toward him, claw by claw. The wind was sharp that night, cutting through Ethan's coat as he walked the dirt road leading out of Dust Haven and back to his family's ranch. The moon was a pale sliver, barely enough to light the path ahead, and the smell of scorched hay still clung to his clothes after the barn fire. He kept one hand in his coat pocket, close to the revolver. The other gripped the brown paper bag Ruby had handed him quietly before he left. Bread, still warm, and a folded napkin with his name scrawled in tidy script. For a moment, there was peace in the silence, broken only by the crunch of his boots and the hum of insects beyond the ditch. Then came the voices. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Ethan froze. Jed and Hank Miller stumbled from the shadow of a low tree, reeking of whiskey and sweat. Behind them were two others, unfamiliar but mean-looking, the kind of men who didn't smile unless something was bleeding. "Out walking after dark, boy?" Jed slurred, swaying. "Heard tell ghosts haunt these parts. Or maybe it's just gold-hungry bastards like yourself." "I ain't looking for trouble," Ethan said evenly. "You already found it." Hank grinned, stepping closer. The first punch caught Ethan across the jaw, sudden and full of drunken spite. He staggered back, the bread bag falling from his hand and bursting on the ground. Crumbs scattered like dust. Another blow struck his ribs, and he hit the dirt, gasping. "Let's see if the son of the devil bleeds like the rest of us," one of the strangers muttered, drawing something shiny, a knife or maybe brass knuckles. Then a gunshot, sharp, loud, echoing like thunder against the empty fields. Not aimed at anyone, a warning. The attackers paused, then panicked. Hank yelled something incoherent and ran. Jed tripped over himself trying to follow. The others cursed and vanished into the dark. Ethan rolled onto his side, coughing, ears ringing. He looked up, searching. Nothing but darkness. But then, there, a shadow, a tall figure half obscured behind a tree, silent, unmoving. "Who the hell?" Ethan muttered. But the figure was already gone, melting into the night like smoke. The silence returned, heavier than before. Back at the ranch, Ethan cleaned the blood from his lip and pressed a cold rag to his side. His thoughts swirled, questions with no answers. Someone had saved him. Again. Just like the fire. Just like the eyes he'd seen across the fence line days ago. The next morning, with the sun barely over the hills, Ethan walked the stretch of road where the ambush had happened. He scanned the dirt carefully. Near a patch of tall grass, something caught the light. A spent shell casing. He picked it up. It wasn't new. The brass was dulled with age. Etched into its base, faint but still visible, was a mark. Not letters, a crude image. The silhouette of a vulture mid-flight. His breath caught. It matched the faint insignia he'd found on the cloth left behind in the barn fire. Ethan closed his fingers around the casing and stared out at the hills. It couldn't be. He tried telling himself it was a coincidence. A relic someone else carried. A copy. But deep down, something cold settled into his gut. That mark had belonged to the night vultures, his father's gang. He returned to town that afternoon, body sore but movements calm. The saloon was loud, filled with familiar faces, tired ranchers, shopkeepers, and drifters just passing through. The usual. Until one unfamiliar voice cut through the hum. "You the Crowley boy?" Ethan turned. A man leaned against the bar, lean, sharp-eyed, with slicked-back hair and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Rhett," the man said, lighting a cigarette with a silver lighter. "Heard your daddy left behind more than just bad blood. Maybe even a treasure trail. Thought I'd come sniff around. I ain't got nothing for you." Rhett chuckled. "Oh, I think you got plenty, boy. Gold, guns, ghosts. Whatever it is, it's buzzing like flies around shit. And you're right in the middle." Ruby appeared behind the bar, setting down a glass a little too hard. "He's not interested. Leave him alone." Red ignored her, taking a slow drag. "Keep your secrets, cowboy. But Dusthaven's full of ears, and not all of 'em friendly." Ethan left without another word. That night, with the sun setting behind the barn's broken roof, he entered his father's room. The revolver box was still there under the bed. He pulled it out. The pouch of gold remained, but the gun was gone. He stood still for a long time. No signs of a break-in, no shattered glass, no footprints in the dust, just the empty space where the weapon had lain. Someone had been here. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Ethan found the note at dawn, tucked neatly beneath the front door frame where the wind couldn't catch it. The paper was folded twice, stained with grease and something darker. He unfolded it slowly with calloused fingers. "Return the gun. Return the gold, or bury everyone in that house." Signed with the jagged emblem of the night vultures, a vulture's talon scrawled in black ink. His throat dried. His first instinct was to burn it. The second was to load a rifle and sit on the porch till Judgment Day. But instead, he tucked the note into his coat and headed for the one place in Dusthaven where he could still find someone who hadn't yet turned their back on him. The chapel. The church sat crooked at the end of Main Street, white paint peeling, bell rusted silent. Inside, Reverend Cole stood beneath the stained glass window, oil lamp in hand, polishing the cross above the altar. When Ethan walked in, the wooden floor gave a loud creak. The Reverend turned with a look that said he'd been expecting this. "You've got that face," he said gently. "The one that says trouble's already on your porch." Ethan handed him the note. Cole read it in silence, jaw tightening. Then he folded it with surprising care and slipped it into his coat pocket. "You tell anyone else?" "No, not yet. You should have. This ain't just your problem anymore." Ethan stared at the floorboards. "They want what my father left behind, but it's not mine to give, and I ain't about to put anyone else in the line of fire." Cole stepped forward. "You can't do this alone, son. If this town turns its back on you, that's one thing. But if you stay quiet and blood gets spilled, that's on your hands." Ethan didn't answer. "You know where to find me." the Reverend said softly. "I'll be ready." Later that morning, Martha arrived at the ranch, basket in hand and eyes full of suspicion. "Something's wrong," she said, handing him a warm loaf of sourdough. "You're tighter than a drum." Ethan didn't deny it. He handed her the pouch of gold. "You think it's worth anything?" Martha whistled low. "Depends who you're askin'. Gold don't lose its shine, but bloodstains don't wash out easy." She glanced at the barn, still bearing the char from the fire. "You should take this to the bank in Calhoun. Get it out of here. Let them lock it up." Ethan shook his head. "If I do that, someone will follow it. Or worse, follow me." That afternoon, Ruby found him patching fence posts out back. She leaned against the gate, arms folded. "You know there's a man in town, calls himself Booker, selling old outlaw gear out of the back of his wagon. Says he's got a gun with a skull on the grip. Sound familiar?" Ethan stiffened. "Where?" "Town over. Heading there next week. But word is folks are sniffing around asking for other pieces. Like someone's trying to gather what's left of the old vultures." Ethan looked down at his hands, dirt and splinters lodged beneath his nails. "How many people know?" "Too many," Ruby said, then softer. "You need to learn to fight back." She led him behind the barn where an old hay bale served as a target. Ethan pulled the old rifle from the shed, the one he barely remembered how to load. Ruby handed him a box of cartridges. He missed the first 3 shots, flinching with each bang. The 4th ricocheted off a rock. By the 5th, he hit the corner of the bale. It wasn't pretty, but it was a start. Ruby didn't smile. "You'll need to be better than that." That night, the firelight danced along the kitchen walls as Ethan sat alone, reading the note again. "Return the gun, return the gold, or else." He had neither now. The gun was gone. The gold, partial and tainted. Sleep didn't come easy, and, just past midnight, a commotion outside jolted him to his feet. He grabbed the rifle and ran out barefoot. By the barn, 2 figures wrestled with something near the wall. One was lighting a rag in a bottle. "Hey!" Ethan shouted. They turned, Jed and Hank, drunk, angry, and slow. Before Ethan could raise the rifle, another figure appeared from the dark. The town sheriff, flanked by 2 deputies. The torch hit the ground, flames licking the grass before being stomped out. "You boys got a death wish?" the sheriff barked. Later, in the sheriff's office, Jed slurred through his confession. "We didn't mean nothing by it. Rhett just paid us a little to scare the kid. Said we'd get a piece if things went south. Ethan said nothing, just watched through the bars as Hank threw up into a bucket. As dawn crept in, Reverend Cole found Ethan sitting on the church steps. "They'll be back," Ethan said quietly. "Next time, not so drunk, not so stupid." Cole handed him a tin mug of coffee. "Then you'd better be ready." A few hours later, Ruby showed up with a newspaper clipping folded in half. "Someone's selling another gun," she said. "Skull grip, same make, different town, but sounds like the same damn legacy." Ethan stared at the article, fingers trembling. Someone was trying to gather the ghosts of the past, and they were closing in. The morning was crisp, and the wind carried the scent of dry leaves and frost-bitten sage. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the pouch of gold spilled out before him, coins dulled by time and dust. As he sifted through them again, as he had a dozen times, something caught on the tip of his nail. A thin slip of metallic paper folded tightly between 2 coins. He unfolded it slowly. The ink was faded, smeared in places, but legible. "Red Hollow," 3 autumns ago, his breath caught. Red Hollow, a narrow gulch a half-day's ride out, once used by traders and stagecoaches, now mostly forgotten, or purposefully ignored. He looked out the window toward the fields where the wind bent the grass low. A decision settled in his chest like the click of a loaded chamber. He couldn't sit and wait anymore. By midday, Ruby had agreed to come. She rode beside him without questions, just a firm nod and a rifle slung across her back. She said nothing until they cleared the outer fence of Crowley Ranch, and the dust of Dusthaven disappeared behind them. "You sure about this?" she finally asked. "No," Ethan said. "But I got no choice." The trail to Red Hollow was narrow and overgrown. Trees leaned in, their bare limbs like the fingers of old men, and the shadows fell long even though the sun was still high. They reached the ravine by late afternoon. The hollow wasn't much to look at. A dip between 2 hills, red rock stained darker by age and memory. Ethan dismounted, boots crunching on gravel. A shiver passed through him. "This where it happened?" Ruby asked softly. "Could be," he replied. 3 autumns ago. That'd line up with when he disappeared. They combed the area in silence. Near a moss-covered boulder, Ruby bent down and picked up something small, a misshapen hunk of lead. A bullet, flattened against stone. Ethan found a scrap of old cowhide caught beneath a bramble bush, marked with a half-erased brand. He didn't recognize it, but something about it looked military, or gang-made. Then he spotted the edge of a small metal tin buried halfway beneath a flat rock. He pried it loose. Inside were 3 things: 2 ancient gold coins, dulled and scratched, a yellowed, torn letter with water-stained ink, and a photograph, just a corner of it left, showing a man's hand resting on a rifle stock. A rifle with a skull carved into the grip. Ruby stared at the contents, her face pale. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Someone buried this for a reason." Ethan pocketed one of the coins and the photo fragment. "And I'm going to find out what that reason is." He left the rest covering the tin again. They turned back toward their horses, but before they could mount, the sharp crack of a rifle burst through the ravine. Dirt exploded at their feet. Ruby ducked behind a rock, cursing, "Son of a... They're watching us." Another shot rang out, closer this time. "Keep down," Ethan barked, fumbling for his revolver. From the cliffs above came a shadow, just a flicker, and then a different gun sounded. Lower, heavier, slower. One precise shot. The fire stopped. Silence fell like a blade. Ethan looked up, heart thundering. No one was there. Just the wind and the ghost of smoke from the hilltop. "Who the hell keeps doing that?" Ruby asked, breath ragged. "I don't know," Ethan said, "but I think they want me alive. For now." They rode fast on the way back, the sun beginning its descent, painting the fields in golden blood. As Dusthaven came into view, Ruby slowed her horse and glanced over. "You remember your mama?" she asked, suddenly soft. "A little," Ethan said. "Not much. She used to walk you through the market every Saturday," Ruby said. "You'd hold her skirt and carry a wooden horse. She'd trade eggs for flour and always buy you a piece of sugar candy. Said you had your daddy's eyes, but her stubborn streak." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't know that." Ruby smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "She loved you fierce." They rode the rest of the way in silence. Near the edge of town, as they passed the old blacksmith shop, Ethan slowed. A man stood alone near the fence line, coat too large, hunched like the wind had aged his spine. His face was turned away, staring at the hills. Something in the way he stood, the curve of his back, the angle of his boots in the dirt, sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He opened his mouth to call out, but the man turned, stepped behind the shed, and disappeared. Ethan urged his horse forward, heart pounding. But when he rounded the corner, the space was empty. Just wind and dust and the echo of something long buried, trying to claw its way back. The fire crackled gently in the corner of Agnes Halbert's old home, its glow casting long shadows across faded wallpaper and family portraits that hung crooked on the walls. Ethan sat near the hearth, shoulders tense, while Ruby rested beside him, arms folded. Across from them, Mrs. Agnes, well into her 80s, rocked slowly in a creaky chair, wrapped in a shawl that looked older than Dusthaven itself. Reverend Cole stood off to the side, arms crossed, his presence silent but supportive. Agnes's eyes were cloudy, but they flickered with memory. It was 3 autumns back, cold enough to make your bones feel like glass. She coughed once, then pressed a handkerchief to her lips. They said the gold was cursed. That's what folks whispered after. But I was there, child. I saw it. Ethan leaned forward. What did you see? Agnes's hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a splash of tea. There was laughter first, not the joyful kind. Wild, cruel, like someone had lost their mind. Then came the crying. A woman or a child, I couldn't tell. The sounds echoed through Red Hollow like the devil himself had opened his lungs. She looked at Ethan then, her voice lowering. And I saw a man, tall but hunched, stood like a shadow stretched too long. He held something in his arms, a bundle, a child maybe. He ran away from the smoke, not toward it. Ruby glanced at Ethan, her brow furrowed. A child? Agnes nodded. He wasn't shooting. He was fleeing. Before Ethan could speak, the front door opened, and a tall, wiry man stepped in, uninvited. His boots tracked dust across the floor, and he carried the scent of cheap tobacco and old grudges. Enough with the ghost stories, Agnes, the man snapped. You're scaring kids with nonsense. Luther Grant, Reverend Cole muttered. Still the same hellraiser, I see. Luther turned to the room. Silas Crowley was a killer, led that raid. My brother died there. Ain't no 2 ways about it. You weren't there, Agnes said, her voice trembling but firm. I saw what was left, Luther barked. You think a man like that can carry a baby and still cut down 8 guards? The room thickened with tension. Agnes clutched her shawl tighter. Ethan remained silent, but inside something splintered. Later that evening, back at the ranch, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the torn letter he had found at Red Hollow. His thumb brushed over the faded ink where a name had been scrawled at the bottom. Silas. His chest tightened. Was that really his father? A murderer? Or a man trying to escape something far worse? Outside, dusk fell like a curtain. Crows circled the treetops. The bell above the barn door clanged faintly in the wind. That night, the town gathered for a small meeting at the chapel, prompted by Reverend Cole. The recent violence had shaken even the boldest voices into silence. Reverend Cole began. This town was built on trust, and if we let fear rule us, then we've already lost. But as the Reverend spoke, a younger man stood abruptly, one of Rhett Marlowe's crew, greasy-haired and loud-mouthed. You letting that old bat spin tales now? He shouted, pointing at Agnes in the front pew. Next thing you know, she'll say Silas was a damn saint. The room erupted in murmurs, some disapproving, others amused. Agnes looked down, hands shaking. Ethan stood, not quickly, not with anger, but firmly, voice clear. You weren't there, he said, eyes locked on the heckler. None of you were. So unless you saw it with your own eyes, maybe keep your mouths shut about things you don't understand. Silence dropped like a hammer. The man scoffed but said no more. Reverend Cole gave Ethan a brief nod of respect. Later that night, Ethan walked to the creek behind the ranch. The moonlight rippled across the water as he knelt to rinse the dirt from his hands. His reflection wavered in the stream, rough, tired, the hint of stubble growing darker on his chin. He stared at his face, at the eyes, his father's eyes, people said. "Am I becoming him?" he whispered to the water. No answer came, just the rush of the current and the soft rustle of trees beyond. By the time he returned to the house, the night had grown heavy with cold. The porch boards creaked under his boots. Then he saw it. Propped against the door, still smoking at the base, was a wooden cross, half burned, scorched black, the fire extinguished before it could consume the whole thing. A message, a threat. His hands clenched, and this time there was no fear in his chest, just fire. The rain had started just after dusk, cold and sharp like nails falling from a black sky. It drummed relentlessly on the tin roofs of Dusthaven, masking footsteps and muttered threats alike. The old freight depot on the edge of town stood silent, its wooden sidings swollen with damp, lanterns flickering behind cracked glass. Inside, a few townsfolk bustled nervously, stacking crates, checking locks, whispering rumors about stolen goods and the vultures circling Dusthaven's bones. Ruby was there, standing near the back wall, hands trembling around a lantern. Her eyes searched the doorway. Ethan arrived late, soaked through and breathless, the handle of his father's revolver hidden beneath his coat. He had no plan, no certainty, only a growing dread that everything was slipping past the point of no return. Then the door burst open. Jed and Hank stumbled in first, bloodied and shouting. "They're coming!" Hank yelled, eyes wide with panic. "It's Rhett's boys!" Chaos erupted before the words could settle. Through the back windows, shadows moved fast. 6 or 7 men, faces wrapped in scarves, carrying clubs and pistols. One of them kicked the door off its hinges. The townsfolk scrambled. Crates fell. Someone screamed. Ethan ducked behind a stack of burlap sacks as a shot cracked overhead. A bullet shattered a lamp, sending glass and flames spilling across the floor. Jed tried to rush the door with a rusted rifle, but was knocked down, groaning as a boot landed square on his chest. Ethan crawled forward, mud slick on the floorboards. He pulled the revolver, hands shaking so hard the metal clinked against his belt buckle. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. One of Rhett's men spotted him. "Got you, little Crowley," the man sneered, drawing a knife and closing in. Ethan raised the revolver. "Don't!" But the man lunged. Bang! The shot missed, slamming into a crate just inches from Ruby's head. She screamed and dropped the lantern. It shattered, flames licking up the corner of the wall. The man froze, startled. Then a second shot rang out. Sharp, deliberate. A bullet punched through the attacker's thigh, dropping him screaming into the mud. The shot had come from outside. Ethan hadn't pulled the trigger. In the confusion, another shadow moved beyond the open door. A figure, tall, cloaked, unrecognizable in the rain, lowered a smoking rifle and vanished before anyone could speak. The rest of Rhett's men scattered, dragging their wounded away. No one chased them. The room smelled of blood, wet wood, and kerosene. Ethan stood frozen, the revolver still gripped in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. "You okay?" Ruby rushed to him, eyes wide with fear and something else. Recognition. I didn't mean to shoot," Ethan muttered, his voice cracked. He was going to kill me." "You didn't kill him," she said, glancing toward the moaning figure on the floor. "Someone else did the real damage." But Ethan wasn't listening. He looked down at his hands, stained with mud and powder, and something in him cracked open. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just part of the story anymore. He was a piece of the violence, a player in the blood-soaked history he'd spent his life trying to escape. By dawn, the depot was quiet again. Fires extinguished, wounds bandaged. Reverend Cole walked the scene, shaking his head as he prayed under his breath. Near the edge of the building, nestled in the grass, someone found a torn scrap of cloth, dark red, frayed on one side, and marked faintly with the embroidered initials S.C. Silas Crowley. The discovery passed from hand to hand like a hot coal. Eyes narrowed, whispers returned. Was the Quigen truly dead, or had he come back to haunt Dusthaven? Ethan stood apart from the crowd, staring at the cloth in the sheriff's hands. No one said it aloud, but the question hung heavy in the air. Had the devil returned to protect his son? The Dusthaven Harvest Fair brought a strange kind of peace to the town, the kind that felt too thin to hold. Under the bright autumn sun, children ran between barrels of apples and bales of hay. Vendors called out prices for jars of pickled okra, smoked jerky, and hand-stitched quilts. But underneath the laughter, whispers crawled like ants beneath rotting floorboards. Because the figure had returned. He stood on the far edge of the fair, away from the music and color. Long coat dusted with red clay, hat pulled low. He bought only a loaf of bread, a can of beans, and a tin of tobacco, then lingered, eyes fixed toward the distant hills, where the Crowley ranch sat quiet under a silver sky. Martha was the first to recognize the walk. "That limp," she muttered to Ruby, who followed her gaze. "I saw it before. Years ago, back when things still made sense." Ruby's brow furrowed. "You don't think—" "I don't know what I think," Martha said, folding her arms across her chest. "But it sure as hell ain't nothing." Ethan didn't see the man at first. He was helping a neighbor load hay bales into a wagon, trying his best to stay invisible. But he could feel it, that quiet weight pressing against his ribs, like someone was watching him with more than just curiosity. When the fair died down and the vendors packed up, Ethan stayed behind. He sat on a bench outside the general store, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Ruby slid in beside him without a word, handing him a handkerchief to wipe the sweat from his brow. "You saw him?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Everyone did. Do you think it's him?" "I don't know." His voice cracked, then steadied. "But I can't keep pretending like none of this matters, that it's all coincidence." Ruby glanced away. "You said once you wanted to live quiet, just fix fences, feed cows, be left alone." "Yeah, well," Ethan sighed. "Maybe I don't get to choose anymore." A moment passed before Ruby reached into her coat pocket and slid something into his hand. It was a folded page torn from an old newspaper. No headline, just a scrawled note on the margin. "Stay quiet, or die." A golden coin dropped into his lap next, freshly polished, same age-worn pattern as the others. His blood ran cold. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Stuffed in the bottom of my bread basket," Ruby whispered. "Someone's watching close." Closer than we thought. Meanwhile, across town, inside a smoke-hung saloon, Rhett Marlowe sat alone at a table near the back. A man in a gray suit had come through earlier, soft-spoken, clean-shaven, hands too smooth for any local work. He hadn't given a name, only left an envelope with Rhett. Inside was a list of names, locations, and a warning. Time is thinning. Rhett rubbed the bridge of his nose. He didn't like playing middleman, but gold was gold, and orders were orders. That night the fairgrounds emptied, leaving only paper streamers tangled in fence posts. Ethan rode home under a thin moon, his horse moving slow, each hoofbeat louder than the last. As he reached the edge of his property, something caught his eye. A man stood under a skeletal tree, half-shadowed by its dying limbs. The wind shifted, pulling back his collar. For a breathless second, the moonlight lit his face, and Ethan saw it. A scar, thin and pale, ran from cheekbone to jaw. The same scar Ethan had seen in a photograph tucked deep inside a drawer. The same scar his father bore. He stopped cold, heart hammering. "Pa?" he whispered. But the man had already turned, melting back into the night with the ease of a ghost. Ethan didn't follow. He stood in the silence, the golden coin still clutched in his hand, and felt something inside him fracture, something between hope and fear, truth and legend. The town had begun to turn its back on him, half with suspicion, half with concern. And now, the shadows were walking. The wind howled through the hollows as rain fell in thick sheets over Dust Haven. The Crowley ranch groaned beneath the weight of the storm, fences creaking, barn roof rattling like a drum skin ready to split. Ethan stood by the hearth, cup of coffee in hand, the fire behind him crackling low. The storm had been rolling in all evening, but it was the sound that came next that made him drop the cup. A gunshot, sharp, deliberate, echoed through the downpour. Then another. Ethan grabbed the rifle from above the mantel. Without a word, he tore open the front door. The rain punched him in the face as he sprinted into the night. Behind him, Martha shouted, but her voice was swallowed by thunder. His boots sank into mud with every step. Lightning flashed, illuminating the far end of the pasture. The front fence was broken, splintered clean through like something had rammed it. And there, lying motionless in the muck, were two bodies. Ethan skidded to a stop, rifle raised, eyes darting. A third figure, draped in black, tall and lean, stood just beyond the tree line. The stranger glanced back once, the rain sliding off the brim of his hat. A flash of lightning lit the side of his face, but before Ethan could call out, the figure vanished into the trees, melting into the storm like mist. Ethan stumbled forward, rifle still shaking in his grip. The two men on the ground were strangers, neither from Dust Haven. One had a crude tattoo of a vulture on his neck. The other gripped a broken knife, its blade still wet. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to chat. Footsteps pounded behind him. Martha, soaked through and pale as ash, nearly collapsed when she saw the bodies. "Jesus Christ, Ethan," she gasped. "What the hell is happening out here?" He didn't answer. His eyes had caught something glinting near the hand of one of the dead men. A silver lighter, worn, dented. He picked it up. Engraved on its side were the initials S.C. Ethan stared at it, breath caught halfway between a sob and a shout. He turned it over in his hand, flipped the lid open, struck the wheel. A blue flame sputtered to life. Ruby arrived moments later, coat dragging, hair plastered to her face. She looked at the corpses, then the lighter, then Ethan's trembling hands. Martha was the one to speak. "Is that?" Ethan nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "Silas Crowley. My father's initials." The three stood in silence, broken only by the hiss of rain on the fields. Later that night, as they wrapped the bodies and dragged them to the edge of the property for the sheriff to find, Ethan moved like a man whose soul had slipped just outside his skin. He cleaned the mud from the lighter, held it close to the fire inside the barn, and stared. The metal was cold, but in his chest, something burned. Could it really be him? Could Silas Crowley, outlaw, ghost, father, have never died at all? The next morning, Dust Haven was thick with tension. The rain had cleared, but the air was worse, like the town was holding its breath. At the Rusty Bell Saloon, townsfolk leaned in close, whispering around half-filled glasses. Eyes darted to the door every time it creaked. When Rhett Marlowe finally walked in, he didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room, hands resting on his belt, and raised his voice. "No more games," he said, loud enough to quiet the room. "No more hiding behind myths or ghosts. The Crowley place has secrets, and I'll be the one to dig them up. Every last one." Some men muttered in agreement. Others looked away. Reverend Cole, seated near the back, clenched his jaw but said nothing. Out at the ranch, Ethan sat alone on the porch, turning the lighter over in his hand again and again. The scar on the man's face, the sure shot in the storm, the lighter in the mud. It all pointed to one terrible, beautiful, impossible truth. His father might be alive. But if that were true, it also meant something worse. Silas had never stopped running. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pasture. The wind was quiet, but the air held a heaviness, like the earth was holding its breath. Behind the Crowley house, beneath the old oak tree that had stood sentinel for generations, Ethan dropped to his knees. His hands were trembling, but not from the cold. He glanced at Ruby, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed tight against her chest. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice soft but cautious. Ethan nodded, jaw clenched. "He used to bring me here, taught me how to ride a horse under this damn tree, said it was strong enough to keep secrets." He shoved the shovel into the wet ground. The soil gave way easier than expected. Each scoop unearthed not just dirt, but memories. A smell, a laugh. The low rumble of his father's voice echoing faintly in his mind. After several minutes of digging, the metal edge of the shovel struck something solid. Ethan dropped to his knees and cleared away the dirt with his bare hands until the edge of a weathered wooden box appeared. His breath caught. He pried it open. Inside, wrapped in a stained burlap cloth, was a faded leather jacket. He lifted it carefully. It still smelled of horses and sweat and fire. A scent burned deep into his childhood. Beneath it were 3 Polaroid photographs, yellowed and curling. One showed Silas sitting on the porch with a much younger Ethan on his lap. The boy in the photo was laughing, and the man, the outlaw, the ghost, was smiling in a way Ethan barely remembered. And then there was the letter, a single creased sheet of paper. Ethan unfolded it with cautious fingers. If you're reading this, then I failed. I tried to outrun it. I tried to bury it so it wouldn't bury you. But the past don't stay dead, son. Not when it's soaked in blood and gold. The handwriting was sharp, hurried, unmistakably his father's. Ethan sat back, clutching the letter to his chest, as if it could answer everything that had ever twisted inside him. His eyes brimmed. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the oak leaves above, like the tree was whispering things he wasn't ready to hear. Ruby stepped closer. He loved you, Ethan. You know that, don't you? I don't know anything anymore, Ethan muttered, wiping his face with his sleeve. He left. He let people hate us, let me grow up thinking he was just some legend with a body count. She knelt beside him, her voice steady. Maybe he did those things. Maybe he ran with the wrong kind of man. But what kind of monster buries his past and writes his son a letter like that? What kind of monster teaches a kid to ride under a tree and laughs like that? She pointed at the photo. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat locked. The mixture of rage and grief rose like bile, hot and choking. And for the first time since he was a boy, he cried. Not silent tears of frustration, but raw, gasping sobs that raked his chest. Ruby didn't say anything. She let him have it, just placed a hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, crack! A bullet slammed into the bark of the oak, inches from Ethan's head. Splinters flew. "Down!" Ruby screamed, dragging him flat to the ground as another shot rang out. They rolled behind the tree's wide trunk. A third bullet hit the dirt where Ethan had been kneeling seconds before. "Shit!" Ruby hissed, pulling her revolver from her coat. From the edge of the trees, shadows moved, 3 figures, armed, spreading out. Ethan's heart pounded. "It's Rhett's men." More shouting. Someone yelled, "Found 'em! Bring the bastard out." Ethan grabbed the letter and the photos, shoving them into his coat. "We have to move." "Where?" Ruby said, eyes scanning the tree line. "They'll have us pinned in seconds." "I know the creek path," Ethan said, pointing toward the sloping ridge behind the barn. "If we're fast, we can lose 'em in the brush." They crawled low, hearts in throats, gunfire echoing behind them. Voices cursed. One of the men shouted, "You little son of a bitch. You think you can run forever." Another shot fired wide, hitting a rock with a sharp clang. Ruby turned and fired back blindly, forcing their pursuers to take cover. The creek gurgled faintly ahead, a promise of escape. Ethan stumbled down the muddy path, gripping Ruby's hand. Dirt smeared their faces, their breath ragged. Behind them, the woods screamed with angry voices and snapping branches. As they disappeared into the underbrush, Ethan looked back one last time. The oak tree stood still under the dusky sky, its scarred bark oozing sap from the bullet's wound. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't just see the place as memory. He saw it as battlefield, as reckoning. And war was just beginning. The clouds sagged low over Dusthaven, thick and gray like bruises pressing down from the heavens. The main street sat unusually quiet that morning, shop fronts half open, townsfolk peeking from behind windows with unease hanging in the air like the scent of old smoke. Ethan stood near the post office, boots caked in drying mud, fingers brushing the worn handle of his holstered revolver. He wasn't sure why he'd come to town that morning. Maybe to show he wasn't hiding anymore. Maybe to see who else wasn't. Then came the roar of engines. 2 dust-choked trucks barreled down the street, sending chickens flapping and children scattering. Rhett Marlowe jumped down before the wheels even stopped. Behind him, 5 others dismounted, rifles slung loose, eyes mean. No more whispers in the dark. No more veiled threats. This was broad daylight. Rhett laughed loud, a bitter sound like gravel in a tin pan. Ain't no one listening, so we figured we'd speak louder. He strode into the middle of the street and fired 2 shots into the air. Folks screamed and ducked. Reverend Cole stepped forward, arms raised. "This is not your town, Rhett," he said, voice shaking but firm. "You have no right." Rhett spat on the ground and waved his pistol. "No right? I got bullets. That's all the right I need." He turned without warning and fired straight into a shop doorway. The shot rang out like thunder. A man, old Mr. Hatley, the leather worker, fell backward into the store, blood blooming on his chest. Someone screamed, then everyone did. Reverend Cole rushed to the body, only to be struck across the face with the butt of a rifle. He collapsed in the mud. "Anybody else wanna preach?" Rhett roared. Ethan's ears rang. His hands trembled. He looked around and saw the eyes of a child, no older than 7, frozen near the well, too scared to move. One of Rhett's men was walking toward the boy. Ethan didn't think. He drew. The sound of his revolver cracked through the chaos. The bullet hit the dirt in front of the approaching thug, who stopped short, stunned. "Leave the kid," Ethan barked, voice hoarse. "Look who found his balls," one of the men sneered. Another raised a shotgun. Ethan didn't wait. He fired again. This time the bullet hit. The man spun, clutching his side, and collapsed. The street froze. All eyes were on Ethan now, some in shock, some in horror, a few in awe. Blood pounded in his ears. He'd just killed a man. His stomach twisted, bile burning his throat. But the child was safe. Then another gunshot rang out, from somewhere beyond the street. A sharp whistle of death. Rhett screamed. His pistol flew from his hand as blood sprayed from his upper arm. He stumbled back, clutching the wound. "Sniper!" someone yelled. But by the time they turned, there was no one. Just the rooftops and the clouds, empty again. Rhett and his men scrambled back into the trucks, engines growling as they sped off. The street was left littered with shattered glass, a body, and the fading echo of gunfire. Ethan stood still, revolver lowered, breath ragged. People began to emerge, slowly, cautiously. Ruby ran to the child, hugging him close. Martha rushed to Reverend Cole, whose lip bled, but eyes were clear. No one spoke to Ethan directly at first. But they looked, and they saw something different. No longer the timid son of a dead outlaw. Now he was the man who fired back, the man who stood between danger and the town. Up on the roof of the old bank, a shadow shifted before disappearing. A silver glint, a rifle barrel, vanished into the gloom. The smell of stale whiskey clung to the rafters of Dusthaven's saloon like regret. Light flickered through grime-coated windows, casting muddy shadows over the warped floorboards. Ruby sat alone at the back, her eyes fixed on a crumpled parchment lying abandoned under the lip of the bar. Someone had left it behind. Deliberately or not, she couldn't say. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. Unfolding it revealed an old map, hand-drawn and stained by time. Etched in the corner was a crude sketch of Red Hollow and a path winding up past Dead Horse Ridge to a place marked only by a jagged, black X. She blinked twice, heart quickening. Later that evening, she found Ethan in the barn, fixing a broken latch. His shirt clung to his back with sweat and dust. Ruby handed him the map without a word. "What's this?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "I found it. In the saloon. Someone left it or wanted it found. He studied the lines, tracing the route with a fingertip. The same unease that had haunted his dreams since the first gunshot, now curled in his gut. It leads to something, Ruby said, and I think it's what everyone's been after. In the shadows near the stable, Jed lurked. The drunkard had sobered up just enough to listen. He leaned in, caught a few words, then slipped into the night like a roach toward filth. Ethan sat on the porch that night, the map in one hand and a match in the other. He watched the flame flicker, threatening to devour it. All he had to do was let go. Burn it, bury the past, walk away. But he didn't. The wind died, and in the stillness came a knock at the door, urgent, frantic. Ruby answered. Sheriff Corman stood there, face pale. "It's Martha." "She's gone. Taken." Witness saw Rhett's boys drag her toward the east road. Ethan's throat tightened. "Why?" "He left a message," Corman said, pulling a torn piece of paper from his coat. Ethan snatched it, scrawled in jagged black ink. "Bring the map to the X. You know where. Come alone, or she dies." The paper crumpled in Ethan's fist. His body tensed, breath shallow. He walked past the sheriff, grabbed his rifle, slung it over his shoulder. Ruby blocked the door. "You're not going alone," she said. "They'll kill you both." He looked at her, eyes hollow but burning. "I don't have a choice." "You do," she said, "and I'm choosing to go with you." "You don't have to." "I know." They stood in silence for a moment, two figures against the wide dark of the plains, the wind whispering promises of blood and fire. In a small room behind the saloon, Jed handed the overheard intel to Rhett. The outlaw grinned like a wolf catching scent of wounded prey. "Get the men ready," he said. "It's time." Out on Main Street, the townsfolk shuttered windows, locked doors. Fear hung over Dusthaven like a gathering storm, but under it, a strange whisper moved through the crowd. "Crowley's boys riding out. They took his girl. Maybe he ain't his father after all. Maybe he's better, but only time would tell." The wind howled through Red Hollow like it remembered every scream that had once echoed through its stone-throated gorges. Red dust blew in gusts, biting into skin and eyes, stinging with the ghosts of a bloodied past. Ethan, hands bound behind him with rough hemp rope, stumbled forward under the watchful barrels of night vultures. Ruby walked beside him, her lips split and dried with blood, chin held high despite it all. Behind them, Martha sobbed through a gag, wrists raw from struggling. They were marched through the ravine, flanked by boulders blackened with soot, charred remnants of the massacre 3 autumns ago. Here, where wagons burned and gold vanished, the past clawed back to life. Rhett strutted ahead like a man rehearsing for a legend he thought he'd authored. His coat flapped in the wind, hat tipped low over cold eyes. He stopped and turned sharply, his revolver twirling to a stop, the muzzle pointed directly at Ethan. "Well, well," Rhett sneered, stepping closer until he was nearly nose to nose with Ethan. "This where Daddy died, ain't it? I figure it's only right you join him right here, same damn dirt." Ethan said nothing. His jaw trembled, but not from fear. At least, not anymore. It was rage now. Rage and confusion and heartbreak, boiling behind his eyes. Ruby spat blood to the ground and hissed, "You don't know shit about his father, Rhett." "Oh, I know enough." Rhett grinned, then swung the back of his hand across Ruby's cheek, knocking her to the ground. Ethan lunged but was yanked back by 2 men holding his shoulders. "You son of a—" Rhett pressed the barrel of his gun against Ethan's forehead. Say that again, Crowley. Just one more time. You think you're brave now, huh? Little ranch boy with dirt on his boots, pretending he's his father's ghost. He leaned in, voice low, venomous. But I knew your daddy. Silas wasn't no hero. He was a bastard, a killer, and he died like one. Ethan stared straight ahead, breathing hard. You're wrong, he whispered. You didn't know him. None of you did. Rhett's eyes twitched. Then tell me where the gold is. Tell me now, and maybe I let your pretty redhead walk away. I don't know, Ethan said. I never knew. Rhett's lips curled. Liar. He cocked the hammer. Time slowed. Even the wind seemed to hush. And then, crack, crack, crack. 3 gunshots rang out in rapid fire, echoing off the cliffs like thunder. One of Rhett's men dropped instantly, chest blooming red. The second screamed as a bullet tore through his shoulder. The third scrambled for cover. Panic. Chaos. Rhett spun around, firing wildly toward the ridge. From above, a dark figure stepped into view, rifle raised in steady hands. Long coat flapping, wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face aged by time and heat. And yet, the scar. Even in the distance, Ethan saw it clearly now. Running from temple to cheek, carved like a knife's memory. His breath hitched. Dad? Silas Crowley didn't speak. He just fired again, picking off another vulture. Ruby shoved her shoulder into a distracted captor, grabbed his pistol and shot him point blank. Get Martha, she shouted to Ethan, already untying her own hands with trembling fingers. Ethan sprinted through the dust, ducking bullets, sliding next to Martha. He cut her ropes with a broken piece of glass, shielding her with his body as more shots exploded overhead. Rhett, screaming curses, dove behind a rock. Find him! Find that old fucker! The vultures scrambled like ants, shooting blind into the cliffs. Silas vanished between 2 boulders, reloading with a calm precision that only came from years of bloodshed. Ethan dragged Martha behind a fallen log. She was crying, but alive. Ruby joined them, panting, gun still smoking in her hand. We need to move, fast. But Ethan wasn't listening. He stared up into the ridge where his father had stood just seconds ago, heart pounding with something deeper than fear. Hope, grief, wonder. Silas Crowley was alive, and the reckoning had just begun. The moon hung like a bloodshot eye above Red Hollow, casting long shadows across the scorched earth and jagged rock. Gunsmoke floated on the air, mixing with the scent of dust and sweat. The sound of silence was deafening, until a voice, gravelly and wrathful, shattered it all. I ain't the goddamn Black Devil no more, the voice growled from the darkness. I'm just a father to that boy. From behind the bluff, Silas Crowley stepped into the moonlight. His frame was worn, limping slightly but steady. A double-barreled shotgun shook faintly in his calloused hands, not from fear, but fury held too long inside a man who'd seen too much. His long coat fluttered like wings of death. That scar, cut down his left cheek like a brand from hell, gleamed in the light. Ethan stood frozen. The world narrowed to the man walking toward him, the same man from old Polaroids, the man he was told was long buried in a nameless grave. His mouth went dry. Dad? Silas didn't look at him. Instead, he raised the shotgun and pulled both triggers. Boom! Boom! 2 night vultures went down hard, one crashing into a dead bush, the other folding into the dirt like a puppet with strings cut. Screams broke out. "Get them!" Rhett roared from behind a boulder. "Kill the old bastard and the boy!" Bullets rained across the hollow. Ruby dove over Martha, shielding her as she pulled a hidden knife from her boot and cut the bindings around her friend's wrists. "Run!" she screamed. "Run, now!" Martha scrambled into the shadows as Ruby ducked behind a jagged rock, revolver in hand. The chaos grew louder, hotter, like the past itself was burning back to life. Ethan grabbed his rifle and ducked behind a fallen log beside Silas. They exchanged a glance, just a second, but in it, 1,000 unspoken truths passed between them. Silas cracked the shotgun open, reloaded with smooth, practiced hands. "You know how to shoot yet?" he asked without looking. Ethan nodded stiffly. "Not well." Silas grunted. "Then keep your head down and follow my lead." They rose together, firing side by side. The night vultures kept advancing through the rocks and brush. One tried to flank them. Silas caught him in the chest. Another screamed something unintelligible before Ethan clipped his leg. The man went down howling. Ethan's heart pounded, but this time it was different. Not fear. It was purpose. It was blood running with something old and wild, something he'd denied for too long. Behind them, Ruby's revolver barked. "3 more on the ridge," she shouted. Silas snarled and pivoted, firing both barrels. One man fell, the others retreated. A sharp crack split the air. Silas stumbled. "Dad!" Ethan caught him by the arm. Silas cursed, looking down at the blood seeping from his left shoulder. "Just a graze." "Like hell it is," Ethan snapped. Silas shrugged. "You get used to pain, boy. It's the regret that eats at you." Before Ethan could reply, a shrill voice tore through the canyon. "Light 'em up!" Rhett screamed. "End it! End this now!" The remaining vultures surged forward, screaming, guns blazing in a frenzied storm. Silas turned to Ethan, breath ragged. "You ready?" Ethan looked toward the swarm of shadows charging them. He swallowed hard. "I am now." They stood together at the edge of the ledge, father and son, one a myth, one a memory, both alive in the fire of the moment. And behind them, Ruby emerged with Martha safely tucked behind a stone. She raised her gun. "Let's finish this." The hollow roared with violence again. But now, for the first time, Ethan wasn't running. He was home. The air in Red Hollow turned to fire. Gunshots split the night like lightning. Smoke curled in thick, choking tendrils over the red earth as bodies dropped one after another, limbs twisted, faces torn in agony. Screams echoed through the gorge, rage, fear, and the bone-deep sound of men dying hard. Ethan crouched behind a jagged outcrop, blood smeared across his cheek. Some his, most not. His rifle trembled in his hands, but not from fear. Not anymore. Beside him, Silas reloaded with practiced speed, jaw clenched, breath labored. His shoulder still bled from the graze, but the fire in his eyes burned hotter than any pain. "You okay?" Silas barked. Ethan nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You?" Silas grinned grimly. Still breathing, a hail of bullets cracked overhead. One slammed into the rock inches from Ethan's face, sending shards flying. "We've got to move," Ethan yelled. "No," Silas growled. "We hold this ground. This is where it ends." And then it happened. A night vulture broke through the side, flanking them. His revolver roared. Silas shoved Ethan to the ground, taking the full brunt of the shot to the chest. "Dad!" Ethan screamed. Silas staggered back, blood blooming across his shirt like a red flower. But he didn't fall. He lifted his shotgun, roared like a wounded bear, and fired both barrels point blank into the attacker's gut. The man flew backward, crumpling in the dust. Silas dropped to one knee. Ethan crawled to him, hands trembling. "No, no, no! Keep fighting," Silas wheezed, blood in his teeth. "Don't you dare stop now, boy." More vultures came. Ethan turned, something in him breaking loose. He rose, rifle raised, and opened fire. The first bullet tore through a man's eye socket, spraying gore. The next took one in the throat. The third, straight to the chest. No hesitation, no flinching. Ethan Crowley had become something else. He wasn't his father, but he wasn't just a boy anymore. Through the smoke, Rhett emerged, eyes bloodshot, face twisted with hatred, shirt ripped and bloodied but still standing. "Well, well," he sneered, spitting a tooth to the dirt. "The little coward grows teeth." Ethan stared him down, stepping away from his father's bleeding body. "You took enough," Ethan said flatly. "You don't get to take anything else." Rhett laughed. "Big words from a bastard raised by ghosts." He drew his pistol. Ethan matched him. The two men circled, boots crunching dirt, guns trembling in the flickering torchlight. "Your daddy screamed like a pig when I slit his gut the first time," Rhett snarled. Ethan's eye twitched. "Funny," he said coldly. "You'll be screaming when I put you down." They raised guns in unison. Two thunderclaps tore the night. Ethan staggered, burning in the ribs. Rhett clutched his chest, gasped, and stumbled back toward the edge of the ravine. His hands scrabbled for grip, but found nothing but dust and rock. He looked up, mouth gaping like a dying fish. You ain't." And then, silence. His body slipped, tumbled, and vanished into the abyss. Only the echo of his scream remained, ripping down into the canyon, swallowed by the earth itself. Ethan collapsed beside his father. Silas lay still, lips cracked, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You did good," he rasped. "Better than me." Ethan took his hand, gripping it tight. "Stay with me." Silas smiled faintly. "Told you, don't walk the road I did." Ethan's throat tightened. "I didn't. I walked beside you." Silas chuckled once, then coughed, and his eyes dimmed. The night quieted. Only the crackle of distant flames and the moan of the wind remained. Ruby and Martha rushed over, their faces pale and wet with tears, but Ethan didn't look up. He sat in the red dirt, cradling the man they'd called the Black Devil. But to him, he was just Dad. Dawn broke over Red Hollow with a silence so heavy it pressed down on the blood-soaked soil like judgment. The light cut through the rising mist in slivers, slicing through shattered rocks, broken guns, and the crumpled bodies of the night vultures. Smoke still curled from scattered fires, whispering of the war that had just ended. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried once, then fell silent. At the center of the carnage, Ethan Crowley stood unmoving, one boot heel planted in the red earth, the other knee resting in the dirt beside the man who had both haunted and saved his life. Silas lay still, His blood no longer spilled. His legend, however, had just begun to rise. They buried him behind the old Crowley ranch, beneath the gnarled oak that once shaded a boy and his father as they rode horses through fading summers. There was no headstone, no cross, just a slab of riverstone carved with a simple line. A father. Ethan didn't speak much as they dug. Ruby stayed by his side, hands raw, eyes swollen. Martha brought water and silence. The others, Reverend Cole, a few townsfolk with weather-beaten faces, stood at a respectful distance, unsure of what to say, but knowing better than to leave. The town that once whispered, "Crowley boy," like a curse, now stood quiet in reverence. When the grave was filled, Ethan placed his father's hat atop the mound. The battered brim fluttered once in the breeze, then settled. Reverend Cole cleared his throat, voice rough. "I've said many eulogies, but this one's different." He looked out across the faces gathered. They called him the Black Devil. And maybe once he was. But that man died long ago, the one who gave his life here. He was something else entirely. He paused. And his son, Ethan Crowley, is no devil. He is proof that blood may curse a man, but it does not have to define him. A murmur went through the crowd. "Contrai quoquigen," someone whispered. The Black Devil's son. But this time, it wasn't spoken with fear, it was spoken with awe. Back in town, the church bell rang for the first time in years, not for warning, for mourning. Ethan stood outside the barn, wiping the last of the blood from his rifle, hands still trembling slightly. His eyes, once soft, were now carved from something harder, not cruel, just forged. Ruby approached, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You could stay," she offered, voice quiet. Ethan shook his head. "If I stay, I become a shadow." She blinked fast, swallowing emotion. "Where will you go?" "Wherever this name leads me." He strapped the saddlebag to the horse. The map was gone, the gold buried again, this time for good. All that remained was the legacy, and the choice of what to do with it. He mounted up, tugged his hat low. Reverend Cole stepped out from the chapel porch, calling after him, "Ethan!" Ethan turned. "That name," the Reverend said, "it doesn't have to be a burden anymore." "I know," Ethan said, "but maybe it can be a warning." He glanced back at Ruby. She was crying, but her eyes held something else, something fierce, something proud. He smiled at her, just once. Then, with the rising sun at his back, Ethan Crowley rode out of Dusthaven. As the dust rose behind his boots and the church bell echoed one final time, his voice whispered on the wind, carried into the golden light of morning. Fate isn't always cursed by blood. And then he was gone. But in Dusthaven, they would speak of him, the son of the Black Devil, for generations to come. And this time, they would speak his name with honor. Before we ride off into the sunset, let's take a moment to reflect. A man's blood may carry a legacy of sin, but his choices carve the path forward. Ethan Crowley was born in the shadow of a legend, one feared, hated, and whispered about in saloons across Dusthaven. But in the end, he didn't run from that legacy. He stood in the fire, side by side with the man who gave him life, and watched him die, not as a villain, but as a father, trying to make it right. This story reminds us that we are not prisoners of our past or of our parents' mistakes. Redemption is never easy. It's paid for in pain, sacrifice, and courage. But it's real, and it's ours to claim. What would you do if you found out your father was an infamous outlaw? Would you bury the truth? Or face it with a gun in hand? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if this story stirred something in you, drop a 1 in the comments. Watching from a dusty town or a big city? Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if you crave more gritty, true-feeling Western tales, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next legend told here on True Wild West Stories.